Ned Stark stood among the dusty stones of the Tower of Joy, the wind sighing across broken battlements. It was a merciless wind, laden with the remnants of battle and the bitter tang of mortality. The horizon stretched wide beneath a copper sky, and in the far distance rolling hills sank into shadow as dusk approached. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the breeze catch at his hair, remembering the bright swords that had clashed that morning. The memories felt too sharp, too vivid. 6 good men of his now lay cold. They had fought like lions to bring him here. Arthur Dane and his sworn brothers lay dead too, their blood soaking the ground where it had mingled with dust and sorrow. In the tower behind him, she was waiting. Every step toward the tall, narrow doorway filled him with dread. He ascended the worn stairs, each echo a steady drumbeat in his head. The tower was silent as the grave. The walls were thick stone, the corridors cramped. The hush weighed on him, pressing in on his ears like some spectral hush of a crypt. He could already smell the candle wax and the faint trace of fresh blood in the air. He expected to find her the same way he had always known her. Spirited, quick to laughter, unstoppable. But he had seen her only rarely in these last fateful months, and each time she was more a memory than a sister of flesh. Rhaegar Targaryen had stolen her away, or so the realm believed. The truth of it was entangled in half-known stories. At the end of a corridor, he found the door to her bedchamber unbarred. A single torch guttered on the wall, casting stunted shadows over the floor. Within the small chamber, he saw her lying on a narrow bed, her skin ashen, her long dark hair fanned across the pillows. The sound of ragged breathing caught him by the throat. Lyanna was dying. A midwife with red-rimmed eyes sat by the bedside, and when Ned entered, she rose, tiptoeing back into a corner, as if to vanish into the gloom. Lyanna's face was pale with sweat. She was not the girl who ran through the Godswood laughing and chasing after him and Brandon, or who rode bareback with a wreath of winter roses in her hair. Her lips parted, forming his name in a trembling hush. He moved closer, kneeling by the bed and setting his sword aside. He took her slender hand in both of his. She opened her eyes only enough to see him, their gray so like his own but filled with fear and exhaustion. When she spoke, her voice was no more than a breath. "Promise me," she said, those words shaped with a desperation he had never heard from her before. Ned felt his heart twist. He knew she would demand a promise. She must have felt him tremble, but her grip was still strong, as if the last of her strength was directed into that gesture. "Anything," he rasped. "I am here, Lya. Whatever you ask, I swear I will do it." As a soar, her breathing grew uneven. A slight moan escaped her lips as another wave of pain crashed through her. The midwife stepped forward uncertainly, wishing to intervene, but Lyanna turned her face away, mustering her last courage to keep her focus on her brother. Tears beaded on her lashes. "Rhaegar," she whispered. "I loved him, Ned. I know there's so much you don't understand." Ned listened, grief welling in his chest. Part of him wanted to hate Rhaegar for all that had happened. For the war, for the deaths, for the heartbreak he had inflicted upon House Stark and all of the 7 kingdoms. Another part of him, the quieter part, recognized that Lyanna's heart had belonged to Rhaegar willingly. It was her choice, for good or for ill. And now the price they all paid was steep. Her fingers clutched at his. She winced once more. Her voice nearly failed her. Yet she pushed on, spurred by a frantic urgency. "My children." Ned's heart lurched. They had told him Lyanna had given birth, and yet he saw only one small bundle near the foot of the bed, swaddled in linen. A child, tiny and still, waited for a mother's warmth that was fast diminishing. Something in the corner of the chamber shifted, and Ned realized with astonishment that there were 2 bundles there. His brow furrowed. He had no notion that she'd borne not 1 child, but 2. They were so silent, it was almost as if they dared not cry in a place so thick with sorrow. "The boy and the girl," Lyanna struggled on. They have Targaryen blood. But they are still of me, Ned." The tears that filled her eyes sparkled like glass. She fought for breath. "Don't let Robert, they would kill them. He hates all Targaryens." Ned swallowed hard. He knew the truth of it. Robert Baratheon had vowed to end every dragonroot in the realm. If he discovered that Lyanna had left behind Rhaegar's children, it would not matter that they were half Stark. Robert would see only Targaryen heirs. He would never rest until they were in their graves. "You must keep them safe," Lyanna pleaded. "Both of them, Ned, both." He squeezed her hand. "They will be safe," he promised, though he had no idea how such a promise could be fulfilled. "I will take them, hide them." She exhaled, and in that ragged sound he heard both relief and heartbreak. Ned felt tears prickle his own eyes. He thought of Catelyn, of how he would explain this. He thought of Robert, newly crowned by victory. He thought of all the lies that must be spun now, all the truths he must bury to keep these children alive. "Thank you," Lyanna whispered, and then her voice grew almost indistinct. He had to lean in, straining to hear her last words. She was repeating a name. He could not catch it fully. It sounded like a whisper of some high Valyrian name. Something Rhaegar must have chosen, though in her weak state it was all but lost. He whispered back to her, promising he would remember. As tears trickled from his eyes, she went still in his arms, her gaze drifting past him, to some place beyond. Ned clutched her hand, shaking, denying the truth as it claimed her. Lyanna was gone. He did not know how long he knelt there. He listened for the sound of her breath and heard only silence. Finally, the midwife touched his shoulder. Her face was solemn. "My lord," she said softly, "the twins." Ned forced himself to stand, to tear his gaze away from Lyanna's still form. On unsteady legs, he moved to where the two small bundles lay. The midwife lifted the first child. The babe's eyes opened, dark as night, the color of a newborn's eyes that had yet to settle. A downy patch of black hair crowned the child's head. "This is the boy," the midwife murmured. She passed him gently into Ned's waiting arms. The child was warm against his chest, letting out a tiny sound of protest. Ned marveled at how fragile he was, so small that Ned felt afraid of crushing him by accident. His heart ached to think that this child would never know Lyanna's face or voice. Then came the other bundle, wrapped in pale cloth. The girl lay quiet, her breathing faint but steady, her hair a tuft that shone slightly silver in the flickering torchlight. Ned's pulse thudded as the midwife placed her in his other arm. She stirred, letting out a weak cry, as though startled by this new voice and scent. The midwife's voice shook, though she tried to maintain composure. "She is smaller, my lord. I fear for her strength." Ned glanced from one to the other, overwhelmed by the weight of the promise he had just made, and the impossibility of fulfilling it. Outside, the fading sun cast crimson light through the arrow slits in the tower wall. He heard the soft moaning of the wind in the high battlements, and he felt as though the realm itself was mourning. He cradled the twins against his chest, swallowing tears as he looked upon them. He named the boy in his heart, though he did not speak it aloud. He had told Robert that the child was his own bastard, fathered in the war, some nameless mother left behind. He would bring the boy to Winterfell and name him John, a name simple and good, but the truth hidden behind a labyrinth of half-lies. But there was also this girl. The realm could not abide one Targaryen babe, let alone two. The weight pressed him down. The midwife was silent, eyes lowered, her grief as real as Ned's. She had tended Lyanna in her last days, risked everything to stand by a woman scorned by the entire realm. Now she bent her head. "What will you do, my lord?" Ned's eyes stung with tears he refused to shed. "What must be done?" he said quietly. He looked at the infant girl. She had parted her tiny lips and let out a mewling whimper. She was not as strong as the boy, but she clung to life. "I will protect them both," he said, repeating his promise to Lyanna. "But I cannot do it alone." He hardly slept that night. He sat vigil next to Lyanna's still form, with the babes in a small cradle near his feet. The midwife dozed in another corner, too exhausted by the day's events to keep watch. The tower was deathly quiet, with only the night wind whistling through cracks in the masonry. By dawn, Ned had formed some plan in his mind, though it tore at him. They buried Lyanna under a modest cairn of stones outside the Tower of Joy, beneath the watchful sky where the early morning sun reflected on the mountains. Ned knelt to place a winter rose atop the stones, a final remembrance for his sister. Then, With the midwife and the babes, he rode away. Dawn bathed the countryside in a soft gold, but in his heart there was only a bleak acceptance of what lay ahead. He had made a vow. Now he would keep it, no matter the cost. In the days that followed, they traveled with all haste, moving across the rough roads that snaked through the domain of Dorne. Ned kept the babes swaddled close, rarely showing them even to the knights who had survived the fight at the tower. Only 2 of his men yet lived, battered and wounded: Howland Reed and Ethan Glover. He trusted them as he trusted himself. But even they had little knowledge of what truly was at stake. Robert was in the capital, being hailed as a hero, forging alliances, celebrating the end of the war, setting aside the last loyalists of the Targaryen cause. Word would spread soon of the final end of the dragon line. Prince Rhaegar was dead. His father, the Mad King, was slain. The last Targaryen children, Viserys and Daenerys, were rumored to be fled across the sea with their mother, though that mother had died giving birth to the girl. Robert's fury at House Targaryen still burned. If he learned Ned had 2 living Targaryens under his protection, the consequences would be unimaginable. But how could Ned hide 2 children? 1 bastard might be overlooked. But 2? Someone would surely talk if Ned returned with twins that looked suspiciously like a Targaryen and a Stark mix. Even if the girl's hair darkened with time, there was a chance it would show a silver glint in the sunlight. It was too dangerous. He found himself wrestling with a bitter resolution. Perhaps, for the sake of the children, they must be parted. 1 babe would be far easier to protect, to pass off as his own. 2 made the secret precarious. The road stretched out endlessly before them, every day a reflection of the last. Scorching heat, dust devils on the horizon, the rattle of harnesses, the rasp of leather and steel. Babes slept much of the time, each swaddled in a small corner of Ned's horse litter. Nights were spent camped beneath the open sky, the 2 men of the north standing guard, their eyes scanning for trouble. The midwife, who introduced herself only as Ellen, carefully tended the twins, feeding them drops of goat's milk or watered wine when mother's milk could not be found. Ned watched her, half in sorrow, half in gratitude. He was haunted by memories of Lyanna, by the oaths he'd sworn, by the knowledge that his once happy friend Robert was poised to become a king steeped in vengeance. Already Ned felt the bond between them fraying. He would keep the children safe. He must. If Robert ever discovered the truth. No, best not to dwell on that. They passed out of Dorne, climbing a narrow pass that led them north. The nights grew cooler, the days more moderate. In the evenings, Ned sat before a small campfire, the twins in his lap, gazing at them in troubled wonder. The boy yawned, nuzzling against Ned's tunic. The girl stared about with wide, stormy eyes. Sometimes it seemed that behind that infant gaze was an ancient soul, as though she sensed the danger swirling around her. Ned always felt uneasy under her regard, as if the child perceived how uncertain he was. At length, they neared the crossroads, where men traveled to reach the Trident or the King's Road. Ned's mind churned. If he took them both north, how could he possibly explain the girl as well as the boy? Catelyn might forgive a single bastard, though he knew she would not embrace the notion. But 2 babes, one clearly a Targaryen princess, would lead to questions Ned could never safely answer. The realm would not be fooled for long. Whispers would spread. Even if no one guessed the truth, they would wonder at the origins of 2 newborns in the care of Eddard Stark. The night they arrived at the crossroads, Ned waited until the others slept. Only Howland Reed sat with him, his wounds healing slowly but well. Reed was a quiet man, small of stature compared to most knights, with a keen mind and unwavering loyalty. Ned knew he could trust him with secrets that would never see the light of day. They spoke in hushed voices, the crackle of the campfire the only other sound. "Howland," Ned said, his eyes on the flames, "I must ask more of you than I have the right to ask." Howland Reed had always been calm, even in the face of the Knights of the Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy. He simply inclined his head. "I owe you my life, my lord." "Ask." Ned glanced at the sleeping babes. "You know what they are," he said heavily. "I have named the boy in my heart. He will come with me to Winterfell as my bastard son, Jon, of my own blood." That is the only way to protect him. Robert would never lay hands on him if he believes the child is mine. But the girl, I cannot do the same for her." His voice cracked, but he forced himself to be strong. "She bears the look of her father even now. Her silver hair may grow more apparent. Robert will not be fooled." Reed followed Ned's gaze. The child lay wrapped in a blanket, only the faint tuft of hair visible. "What would you have me do?" "I want you to take her," Ned said, swallowing. "Find a way to keep her safe, somewhere far from Robert's sight, far from the eyes of the realm." "I have thought on this, and I can see no other path." The night was still. Ned heard only the soft chirping of crickets. Reed's expression was grave, yet no shock registered on his face. He reached out a cautious hand and brushed the girl's swaddled cheek with his fingertips. "I have family in the neck, loyal folk who keep to themselves. Few pass into the swamps by choice. If it pleases you, my lord, I can raise her there, see that she lacks for nothing." Ned felt relief war with sorrow in his chest. "Yes, I believe that might be best. A quiet life. She must never learn the truth of her parents. In time, if it becomes safe, we may reveal it. But not now." Reed inclined his head again. "I swear I will guard her, teach her, protect her. I will treat her as if she were my own kin." Ned closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Lyanna wanted them both safe. "If we part them, it will tear something in my heart. But that is the cost. If they stay together, they will only draw attention to themselves. We must do this for their sakes. If any news reaches King's Landing of a babe with silver in her hair, if any rumor arises, that alone could be a death sentence." Reed placed a hand on Ned's shoulder. "We will keep this secret. Her name, my lord?" "Danu." Ned blinked, remembering the hoarse whisper of his sister's final words, the name she tried to speak. He did not recall it perfectly, for she had been too weak to utter it clearly. It might have been a Targaryen name from the old days. He shook his head. "She will have a simple name, one that does not draw notice. Call her Mara. Let her grow up with that. It is close enough to the mother's name that I might believe Lyanna would approve." That night, Ned scarcely slept, haunted by the choice he had made. The next day, at the break of dawn, the midwife Ellen and Howland Reed prepared to take the girl away. Ellen insisted she accompany them. She had delivered these babes and could not bear to leave the weaker child. Reed agreed, welcoming the help of a practiced midwife. Ned felt a stab of gratitude. He pressed a small pouch of coins into Howland Reed's hands, though he knew no amount of silver or gold would suffice for the burden he was placing on them. Before the parting, Ned held the girl in his arms one last time. She looked at him with that solemn, searching stare. He saw in her expression the echo of Rhaegar Targaryen's intense eyes, and the shape of Lyanna's face as well. She was her parents' child, for good or ill. He bent and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Life," he whispered to her. "That is all I can ask. Grow strong and live." Then he turned away, forcing himself to calmness as Reed and Ellen rode off. The girl was bundled in a small basket, so quiet it almost froze Ned's blood with fear that she would not survive. The midwife would watch her with care. Ned stood, the boy in his own arms, until the silhouettes of Reed's party vanished over the crest of the road. And so the twins, born of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, were parted. Ned continued north with the boy. When asked by his remaining man, Ethan Glover, if they should speak of the girl, Ned shook his head curtly. "She did not survive the birth," he said, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. And from that day forward, that was the story. Lyanna bore one child, a boy, and that boy Ned claimed as his own. No one was to speak of another. No one else need ever know. They rode on, the travelers growing fewer as they left the southern lands and took the King's Road. Ned had a constant knot in his stomach, worrying not only about the danger that awaited them, but about how to speak to Robert, about how to face Caitlin. The war had changed everything. He had left Winterfell bright with hope and young love. He was returning a man weighed down by secrets and regrets. The child would bear the surname Snow, and the scorn of those who saw him as Ned's bastard. but it would keep him safe from Robert's wrath. Their pace was unrelenting. Ned's men wanted to reach the Trident quickly, then to River Run, where Catelyn waited. But Ned did not linger in River Run long. His new wife saw the child with suspicion. She did not demand immediate explanations. It was not her way to question him in the midst of victory celebrations that were half funerals. Still, Ned saw the wound in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. He held her close that first night, determined to be as gentle as possible. She did not ask about Lyanna, but she cried softly for the father and brother she had lost. When her tears subsided, she brushed a shaking hand over the child's brow. "Your son," she said quietly, voice trembling. "I would be a mother to him if I can." Ned felt his throat constrict. "Thank you," he managed. "I know it is not what you expected." She turned her face away, a sad acceptance flickering across her features. "We have all lost so much. Let us not lose each other." He bent his head to hers. Next morning he told her the name he had chosen. John, in honor of John Arryn, the lord who had fostered Ned and Robert both. She did not object. Yet a strain remained in her expression that he doubted would ever truly fade. The realm settled into a precarious peace under King Robert. Ned was named Warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell, as was his birthright. He did his duty, returning to his lands, seeing to the rebuilding after the ravages of war. He brought the child with him, introduced him to the household as his own. While many whispered behind their hands about the snow, a few shrugged it off. After all, lords coming back from war with bastards was hardly rare. It was not well spoken of, nor did it endear him to his new lady wife. But life in Winterfell resumed, following the turning of the seasons. The storms of war had passed. But in the neck, hidden among the marshes and mist, the other child grew. Howland Reed and Ellen kept her existence a secret. They claimed her as a distant cousin's orphan, a child whose parents had perished in the war. Crannogmen were a reclusive people, seldom venturing forth except by boat along the hidden waterways. Outsiders rarely bothered them in the swamps. The tale was simple enough, and no one questioned it. As the years slipped by, Ned rarely heard direct tidings of the girl. The fewer communications between the Neck and Winterfell, the safer it was for them all. But every so often, a coded message would arrive with a quiet traveler or a retainer. The gist was always the same. The child was alive, growing, strong in spirit. She showed no bright silver hair, but a pale streak remained, enough to catch the sunlight and reflect it in a ghostly shimmer. She was slender, with eyes of a curious hue, neither stark gray nor Targaryen purple. Ellen saw to it that she was cared for, fed, and taught the ways of the swamp. Ned would read these messages in private, feeling a rush of relief. The guilt never truly left him, though. He had separated them, those twins who had once shared their mother's womb. Parted them in the name of safety. He consoled himself that it was the only choice. That both children were alive, which is more than could be said for many in these tumultuous times. He would think of Lyanna, remembering her bright laugh, her fearless riding, the day she gave him a flower crown to wear and teased him about it mercilessly. He wondered if she looked down now with sadness or acceptance. He had done what she asked. He had kept them alive. The king visited Winterfell from time to time. Robert would greet Ned with a jovial shout, clasping him about the shoulders. They would reminisce about their youth, about battles they had survived. Robert would ask about Ned's bastard in a half-teasing, half-disapproving way. "He's as quiet as you, Ned," Robert once said, ruffling the child's dark hair. "But too solemn for a boy. Next time I come north, I'll bring him a warhammer made for a child's grip." John was but 4 or 5 at the time, staring up at the looming presence of King Robert with wide eyes. But never did Robert guess that the boy was more than Ned's bastard. The rest of the realm didn't question it either, for Ned Stark was an honorable man, if too tender-hearted at times. The notion that he would hide a Targaryen was inconceivable. That the girl child existed at all remained buried in the marshes of the Neck. Years passed. John grew into a quiet, determined child, learning swordplay from the master-at-arms at Winterfell. He was overshadowed by Ned's trueborn son, Robb Stark, and others soon to come. But Ned's promise to raise him with as much care as possible held firm. Catelyn did her best, but she always held a touch of distance from him, as if the child's mere presence was a reminder of her husband's supposed infidelity. Ned noticed, but there was little he could do. That was the price of secrets, the price of his vow. In the wetlands far south of Winterfell, the small girl Mara learned to swim among the reeds, to hold a spear of sharpened bone, to catch fish in shallow water. She laughed with a bright lilting sound that sometimes made Ellen's heart ache. She was quick-minded and curious about the world beyond the neck. When travelers passed through, she would pester them with questions. What lay beyond those hills? What were the great cities like? One day she found a polished shield in Howland Reed's storehouse, its surface smooth enough to reflect her face. She saw her pale hair and unusual eyes, and she asked if she was different from the other crannogmen. Ellen brushed it off. All our folk have a certain look to them, dear one. You are no different at heart. She stroked Mara's cheek to calm her. You are a child of the swamp. This is your home. Howland Reed would watch her from a distance, thoughtful. He saw something in the tilt of her head that reminded him of Rhaegar, glimpsed a spark in her curiosity that was all Lyanna. He prayed they could keep her hidden, that she would never know the cruelty that awaited her if ever the secret was revealed. He wrote discreet messages to Lord Stark when necessary, always couched in vague references. The harvest is good. Your southern orchard thrives, though a unique branch grows. It weathers storms well. Ned would read those lines and know that Mara still lived, that she was well. Then he would burn the letter, ensuring no trace remained. Yet the years crept on, and with each passing season the children grew older, each entirely unaware of the other. Jon in Winterfell tried to be content with his place, though he was often reminded he was not truly a Stark. Mara in the Neck lived a modest but free life, loved by those who cared for her, but always cloistered from the wider realm. Each carried the blood of dragon and wolf, though neither of them suspected it. Ned, weighed by the burdens of lordship and fatherhood, pushed the guilt of his deception deep down. It gnawed at him during solitary hours, or when he visited the crypts under Winterfell to place a candle at Lyanna's statue. He would look at the stone likeness of her face and remember the night she made him promise. There were times he wondered if the cost was too high, but then he reminded himself that for the children to live, there had been no other choice. Winter's chill arrived eventually. Jon was perhaps 8 when the first truly harsh snows fell upon Winterfell. He scurried through the yard, playing with Robb, a mock sword in hand. Their breath turned to white mist in the frigid air. From a window, Ned watched them, feeling the press of memory. Sometimes, in the tilt of Jon's head or the determined set of his jaw, Ned would see Rhaegar's ghostly echo. It terrified him. Yet, if Robert ever noticed, he showed no sign. The king was far away in King's Landing, lost in feasts and hunts and affairs of state. In the Neck, storms of rain battered the wetlands, but not snow. Mara had grown tall for her age, though she was slight of frame. She excelled at moving quietly through the murky waters, stepping on firm ground where others would slip. She had a knack for stealth, for noticing small details. The crannogmen admired her quick wit. Some teased her for her pale streak of hair, calling her Ghost of the Marsh. It made her laugh. She had no reason to suspect that she was anything but a marsh girl, a distant cousin to the Reeds. She did not know of the wide world, the castles of stone and ice far to the north, the identity of the father she would never meet, or the mother who had died for her. Ned's few glimpses of her life came through fleeting letters. On rare occasions, travelers from the Neck would bring word that Mara was healthy, that she had begun to learn some healing arts from Ellen, that she practiced with reed spears and was quite deft. Ned found himself smiling over these accounts, proud of a child he could never acknowledge. He wondered if one day, fate might bring them together, if the children would sense that bond of blood. He pushed such thoughts aside. Even the slightest slip could bring ruin upon them. One evening, as Ned walked the walls of Winterfell, a raven arrived from King's Landing bearing news of fresh turmoil. Across the narrow sea, talk swirled that Viserys Targaryen was growing older, that there might be moves to restore the Targaryen line. Some of Robert's advisors whispered that the best solution was to send assassins to end the Targaryen threat once and for all. Ned's stomach clenched with dread. If Robert was so determined to kill those exiled Targaryens, what might he do if he ever suspected even a drop of dragon's blood in Ned's own household? Or if the existence of a half-Targaryen child in the Neck came to light? The threat was real and would never truly vanish. Ned tried to sleep that night, but his dreams were haunted by a tower swaying in the desert wind, by Lyanna's dying gasp, by the sight of infant eyes reflecting a silver glimmer. He awoke with a tightness in his chest that would not subside. To ease his nerves, he went out alone, walking among the quiet courtyards, watching the new fallen snow collect on the stone paths. Winterfell by moonlight looked half fey. The cold bit at his cheeks, but he did not mind. The stillness gave him time to think. He imagined what the girl's life was like in the Neck, if she was happy, if she felt lonely. She had no siblings, no knowledge of the father and mother who died bringing her into the world. She had never played in the yard with her half-brother, never felt the northern wind or known the hush of the godswood. Jon, at least, had the comfort of Winterfell, the presence of his half-siblings. Mara had no one but distant cousins and caretakers. He wondered if she ever gazed up at the stars and dreamed of something beyond the marsh. He exhaled a plume of white breath, remembering the last time he had seen her, only days old, in his arms. She was a piece of Lyanna he had let go. Perhaps that was the hardest truth. That he had broken something that should never have been broken, but it was the only way to keep her alive. Across the yard, a torch flared. He saw the silhouette of a man walking the walls. All was well. Winterfell slept on. In the morning, there would be duties to attend, letters to send, the daily business of a lord's life. The realm churned forward as though no secrets lay hidden in its corners. But the day might come when secrets were forced into the light. Ned prayed that day would never arrive. The next year, Jon turned 9, a quiet, serious boy, quick to read, not so quick to laugh. He grew close to his half-siblings, especially Robb, but there was always a lingering sense that he did not quite belong. At times, Ned caught him gazing at the Stark banners as they billowed in the courtyard wind, a yearning in his eyes. Perhaps he wondered why his place was with them, yet not among them. Ned wished he could give the boy more, but the secret demanded silence. The truth would not solve anything. It would only place him in mortal peril. So Ned embraced Jon as much as he dared, never unkind, always fair, but never able to tell him who he truly was. Meanwhile, in the Neck, Mara passed her 10th year. She became known among her folk for cunning and speed, able to weave through the labyrinth of swampland, leading travelers to safety. She discovered a deep fascination with the weirwood trees that grew in hidden groves along the edges of the marsh. Some nights, she claimed she heard them whisper, though none believed her. She brushed it off as imagination. But sometimes she found herself dreaming of a strange place in the far north, a castle of gray stone where the wind whistled through high battlements. She would wake from these dreams puzzled and oddly homesick, though she had never set foot outside the marsh. Ellen, her aging midwife guardian, would hush her. "You have a wild spirit, child. Some call it the old magic, but hush, speak of it to no one. It's safer that way." Mara would nod and keep her secrets. So the two children lived their separate lives, each day carrying them further along paths that might never cross. The realm slowly forgot the final tragedies of Robert's rebellion. People married, had children, died. The talk turned to other matters. The unrest in the Greyjoy lands, the slow rebuilding of the war-torn regions, the petty feuds between lesser lords. The Targaryen threat was a memory, kept alive only in Robert's occasional rages. Ned Stark maintained his vow of silence, and prayed that the gods would not visit more grief upon them. Yet, in the quiet recesses of his heart, Ned still felt the echo of Lyanna's words. "Promise me." Over time, those words had become like a quiet refrain, a vow that shaped his every decision. He would never betray it. The boy was safe in Winterfell, protected by the Stark name, though labeled a bastard, and the girl was safe in the Neck, unknown to any who would do her harm. No matter the personal cost, Ned deemed it a worthy price to keep them from Robert's wrath, or from the ambitions of those who might exploit a Targaryen heir. But secrets have a way of twisting fate, of growing heavier as years go by. The day might come when the truth stirs, rising from the depths like a sunken wreck. And if it did, Ned knew that everything they had built could come crashing down. For now, the North wore a cloak of white in winter's slow approach. The snow gathered high around the walls of Winterfell, the wind keening across the ramparts. Jon trotted after his half-brother's wooden sword in hand, eager to prove himself, to make Ned proud. And far away, in the damp gloom of the marsh, Mara crouched in a canoe, watching the swirl of water and reeds as she guided her small vessel, a half-smile playing on her lips. Neither knew what truly bound them, nor what histories and destinies coiled in their blood. But each felt a sense of yearning, as if something intangible lay just out of reach. And so their lives continued, shaped by a promise Ned Stark had made on a day of blood and tears, in the hush of a dying sister's final breath. Quiet days in Winterfell often harbored small moments of warmth, even in the chill of the northern air. Ned Stark rose before dawn, as he did almost every morning, to walk the ramparts alone. He liked to watch the sky lighten in the east while the moon set behind him in the west, a gentle reminder that each day was a turning of the world. The sun brought no great brightness here in the north, only a pale glow across gray stone. But to Ned, it was a comfort. The hush of those early hours gave him space to think and time to wrestle silently with the memories that refused to leave him. Even after nearly a decade, the truth still weighed on him. Jon Snow was Rhaegar Targaryen's son, and far to the south in the marshes, a girl named Mara shared that same father, each carrying in their veins the blood of dragon and wolf. The knowledge never ceased to burden him. His vow to Lyanna remained unbroken. He was proud of that. But the cost was a wound that never healed. Below, in the courtyard, he saw Jon already awake, a wooden practice sword in hand. The boy was sparring with a dummy stuffed with straw, muttering under his breath each time he struck. Jon was smaller than Robb and Theon, but he had a determination in his face that made Ned's chest tighten. He could see the quiet passion that kept Jon going, the same need to prove himself that had begun to burn in him as soon as he could walk. Each morning, Jon trained early, hoping to catch up to Robb or even surpass him. Ned knew the boy wrestled with the label of bastard. He was aware of the whispers, the averted gazes, the slights. Jon never openly complained. A certain pride in him refused to let it show. Yet Ned worried for his son. If only he could tell him why things were as they were. But that door must remain barred. Too many lives depended on that silence. He left the wall by a stone stair and crossed the courtyard. Jon spun at his approach, lowering the practice sword. His hair had darkened to almost black, and his eyes were a shade of gray that reminded Ned so much of Lyanna. Jon dipped his head respectfully. "My lord." It never sat well with Ned to hear the boy call him that instead of father, or simply speak to him as Robb did. He reached out and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "You've been at it a while," he observed. "Don't overexert yourself, or you'll have no strength for your lessons later." Jon nodded. "Yes, my lord, but I need the extra practice. Robb bested me yesterday, and even Arya is getting quick with that little needle of a blade she carries. I don't want to be left behind." He said it with a small, rueful smile, then looked away as if half ashamed of his ambition. Ned studied Jon's face in the cool morning light. He wished he could say something to bridge the gulf of awkwardness that always seemed to stretch between them. Jon was his son, yet the secrets in Ned's heart kept him at arm's length. "Just don't forget that skill with a blade is not the only measure of a man," Ned said quietly. "You have other gifts, Jon, a good head, a kind heart. The wolves of the north have many strengths." Jon's smile grew more genuine, though still subdued. "Thank you," he whispered. A swirl of wind lifted a few stray leaves from the courtyard's edge. Ned gave Jon's shoulder a gentle squeeze, then turned, noticing the approach of Maester Luwin. The Maester walked carefully, arms folded into his long sleeves to preserve warmth. He bowed his head in greeting. "My lord, a message has come for you from the neck." Ned felt a faint tug in his chest, a familiar ripple of trepidation. He tried to keep his face calm. "Very well." He cast John a small nod. "Go on with your practice. I'll see you at midday meal." John dipped his head, returning to his straw dummy as Ned followed Maester Lewin inside. The interior corridors of Winterfell felt warmer, thanks to the hot springs that coursed beneath the castle. Ned walked with measured steps, steadying his breathing. Messages from the Neck were rare and usually came in coded language. They arrived infrequently enough that no one questioned it when Ned read them in private. He prayed there was no dire news. In his solar, Ned accepted a folded parchment from Maester Lewin. The seal was of plain wax, unmarked by any official crest. As always, no one but Ned would suspect that this letter might bear a weight far heavier than most. Once alone, Ned opened it, scanning the tidy lines of writing. "My lord, the orchard you mentioned grows steadily. The fruit has proven sturdy. The weather treats us well. This past season saw the orchard's caretaker leading a successful harvest. There is some curiosity in the growth of the trees, as they seem drawn to the sun. But the orchard remains healthy and discreet." Ned let out a slight sigh of relief. The orchard was their code for Mara. Drawn to the sun likely meant that she had developed some curiosity about life beyond the swamp, perhaps about the realm at large. But there was no mention of illness or danger. He reread the words, analyzing them for subtext. The caretaker. That would be Howland Reed, or Ellen the midwife, or both. Healthy and discreet. For the moment, the girl's secret remained safe. Still, the pit in his stomach did not entirely ease. He folded the parchment carefully, then dropped it into the hearth where the flames soon licked at the edges. Fire curled the paper, turning it to ash. Another secret incinerated. He rubbed his face with a hand, feeling the faint sting of regret. At times he felt that one day those ashes would come back to haunt him. He composed his reply in similarly coded words, asking Maester Lewin to see it delivered to the Neck by the next suitable messenger. Then he lingered in his solar, recalling the day he'd parted from Mara. She would be nearly 10, if he counted the years correctly. The age difference between her and John was mere minutes, but everything else in their lives had diverged. He thought of Caitlin. She had never asked about John's mother. If she did, Ned would not know how to answer. Most likely she suspected a tavern girl or a camp follower from the war. But she never pressed. Lyanna's face swam in his memory, as it always did. He imagined her looking at him with those fierce dark eyes, demanding he keep his promise. He clenched his jaw and breathed, letting that old ache pass before leaving the solar to resume his lordly tasks. Elsewhere in Winterfell's keep, the day passed as most days did. Servants bustled about, seeing to laundry, scrubbing floors. Men-at-arms sparred in the yard, muttering about the cold. Robb and Theon Greyjoy competed at archery near the western wall, while Sansa and Arya attended lessons in a small tower room. Bran, the second youngest boy, wandered off to climb somewhere he shouldn't, likely to old Nan's chagrin, and Jon Snow, having worn himself out at swordplay, found respite in the library. He wandered among the shelves, his breath catching at the sight of old tomes. He had found a new hunger for reading in the last year, maybe a response to the sense of being an outsider in some ways. Books offered him adventure, escape, and knowledge all at once. He picked a volume describing the histories of the Seven Kingdoms. He traced a finger over the worn spine, noting how often the Targaryen name appeared in the index. He'd read something about them before, about dragons and conquest, about the doom of Valyria. Jon tried not to dwell on it. He was a Stark bastard, not a Targaryen. Yet the name pulled at his attention. Some part of him found it fascinating. The old stories of House Targaryen that had once ruled the realm with fire and blood. He reached for the book, glancing around to be sure no one was watching him. The library was empty aside from Maester Lewin's ravens cooing in the distance. Jon paged through, scanning brief entries. The last dragon died. Prince Rhaegar's skill at arms. The tragedy at Summerhall. The words blurred in his mind, conjuring images he couldn't quite piece together. He knew the realm had fought a war to topple the Mad King, that the Targaryens were either dead or exiled. King Robert loathed them. Jon had heard enough talk around the fortress to piece that much together. Something tugged at Jon's heart as he read the short passage describing Prince Rhaegar. a quiet, studious man who loved music, but who was also known to be a fine warrior when duty demanded it. The footnotes told of how Rhaegar died on the Trident, struck down by Robert Baratheon's warhammer. Jon's mind wandered. What if, in some other world, Rhaegar had lived? The histories would be different, but that was nonsense. A child's fancy. He shut the book. Best not to let his imagination run wild. He returned it to the shelf and left, uncertain why the lines had stirred something unnameable within him. In the neck, Mara was kneeling on a floating raft of reeds as she scraped mud from the bottom of a small wooden craft. Her hair, damp from the swamp's moisture, clung to her neck in curls. The partial streak of silver caught the watery sunlight, glinting faintly. She wore simple garb, a patched tunic, trousers rolled to her knees, and boots that had seen better days. She was slender, agile, capable. The Cranagmen who lived nearby paid her little mind, accustomed to her presence. Yet there was something about her watchful eyes that hinted at a wilder curiosity. She had always been that way, since she was old enough to ask questions. Ellen, the midwife who had once cradled her as a newborn, stood on the bank, calling out instructions. "Careful there. The bottom is slippery. I'll not fish you out if you tumble into the bog." "Now," Mara laughed, an echo off the water's surface. "I've already smelled worse. It couldn't hurt." She steadied herself. Despite Ellen's warnings, she had no trouble balancing on the swaying clump of reeds. She used a short paddle to maneuver the craft closer, hooking its rope around a narrow stump. A fish jumped nearby, sending ripples across the surface. Mara paused to watch it dart away, feeling a rush of fondness for this watery domain. For as long as she could remember, the neck had been her home. The air always thick with mist, and the buzz of insects, the labyrinth of trees and vine-laden huts that sank halfway into the marsh. The Cranagmen lived quietly, seldom venturing beyond their domain. She felt safe here, yet also stifled sometimes. She'd heard snippets of talk from travelers who passed through on the way to or from the north. They spoke of kings and lords, of vast cities and tournaments, of wide roads that stretched for leagues without swamp or mud. It all sounded wondrous and impossibly distant. Ellen's voice cut through her reverie. "You're daydreaming again." Mara shoved the craft, guiding it closer to a makeshift pier. "I'm thinking, that's all. About what lies beyond." "You know better than to pry," Ellen chided softly, but not unkindly. "We have a good life here. Safer to keep our heads low." Mara nodded, though she could not shake the restlessness inside her. When her chores were done, she hopped ashore, tying up the boat. Her skin was flecked with mud, her hands calloused from labor. She took pride in her capabilities, in her knowledge of how to navigate the swamp. But on days like this, she wondered if there was more. She had once glimpsed Howland Reed's shield with the crest of House Reed, a black lizard lion on a green field, and had asked if there were other houses with different sigils. He had spoken briefly of direwolves for House Stark, lions for House Lannister, stags for Baratheon, and dragons for Targaryen, though that house had been nearly extinguished. The idea of a dragon emblazoned on a banner fired her imagination. She sometimes dreamed of seeing such banners flutter in the wind. But the mention of Targaryen had come with a shadow of caution in Howland's voice. She did not press the matter, yet it lingered in her thoughts. Ellen gestured for her to follow. "Come along, time to help with supper. We'll have fish stew and bread if the flour hasn't gone damp." She smiled at the girl. "Howland's back from his foraging soon. He'll be hungry." Mara followed obediently, falling in step beside her, the constant swirl of questions still simmering in her mind. She had grown used to quiet, to partial answers. She trusted Ellen, but sensed that the older woman guarded certain truths. Howland Reed did as well. They had never lied to Mara outright, but they had deflected. She had noticed. Yet her life was full enough with daily tasks: fishing, gathering herbs, weaving nets. Perhaps she should simply be grateful for the peace she had. As the afternoon sun slid behind a haze of low-hanging clouds, Mara helped Ellen prepare the stew. She added bits of onion and roots to the pot, tasting now and again. Her cooking skill was minimal, but serviceable. Ellen tested the broth, nodding in approval. Mara felt a small bloom of pride. She had learned a great deal in these past months. How to trap fish in nets, how to lure frogs from the reeds, how to climb into the hollow of a drowned oak if the water rose too high. These tasks felt second nature, as though she were part of the marsh itself. The wind stirred outside, rustling branches. As Mara lifted her head, she heard a soft splash. Moments later, Howland Reed appeared at the doorway, ducking beneath the low lintel. He was accompanied by his adult daughter, Mira, who had just returned from a fishing expedition. Mara had met Mira only a handful of times, but she always admired the older girl's skill with spear and net. Mira was strong and lithe, with keen eyes like her father. She greeted Mara with a faint grin and set aside a string of fish. "How goes it, little cousin?" she teased, though in truth there was no blood tie between them. At least none that Mira was allowed to speak of. Mara liked her company all the same. Mara returned the grin. "Better now that you're back. Did you find anything interesting beyond the huts?" Mira shrugged, exchanging a glance with Howland. "Just more bog. A traveler we guided out. He was heading for White Harbor. Paid in silver and salt fish. Nothing unusual." Mara tried not to let her disappointment show. She yearned for any story that might describe the lands outside the neck. But she could sense that Howland watched her with thoughtful eyes. He had always been kind to her, treating her like an adopted daughter in all but name. She respected him deeply. Occasionally, though, she detected worry etched across his features, as if he feared she would stray too far. He set a small burlap sack on the table. "Onions," he explained. "Fresh from a friend's garden on the drier side of the swamp. Now let's see that stew." Ellen and Mira busied themselves with cooking. Mara stepped aside, politely giving them space. Howland turned to her. "You've finished your chores for the day?" She nodded. "Hey, I cleaned the boat as instructed. I'd like to go fishing tomorrow, see if I can catch something bigger." He studied her face, noting the restless curiosity. "Take care in deeper waters," he murmured. "The neck can be treacherous for the unwary. There are creatures in the bog that might not appreciate your presence." He paused, then placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are safe here. Never forget that." Mara lowered her eyes, uncertain why his words sounded so solemn. "Yes, sir. I understand." "Good," he said, and she felt the warmth of his reassurance. Yet she also felt he was warning her of something else. Something unspoken. Had she heard the name Targaryen, she would not have known its relevance, but somewhere in her chest, a faint yearning flared. She craved to learn about the world's secrets, about the battles and the banners and the grand halls that lay beyond the foggy marsh. If she could, one day she would travel there. For now she remained still and polite, letting the moment pass. They ate in companionable silence, the stew flavorful enough to satisfy. Mira recounted her fishing luck, telling a brief tale of how she and her brother Jojin navigated a particularly tricky path. Mara listened with interest, storing away every detail. The evening drifted on, quiet and subdued. Outside, rain began to patter against the reeds. The hum of insects gave way to the deeper croaks of frogs. Mara yawned as night settled in, grateful for the warmth of their small fire. In Winterfell, night also descended, bringing a hush to the fortress. Jon slipped away from the main hall after supper, leaving the rest of the family to converse. He found his usual refuge in the Godswood, a quiet place with a large heart tree at its center. The trunk was white as bone, the carved face's eyes stained red with sap. He approached it reverently, pausing before those ancient features. The pool nearby reflected the moonlight, rippling faintly in the breeze. It was here that he often came to think, to pray, or simply to be alone. He knelt on the moss, bowing his head. He was not sure if he believed the old gods listened. Still, something about the Godswood offered solace. The murmur of the leaves soothed him, as though whispering ancient lullabies. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of damp earth. Memories of the day came tumbling through his mind. Sparring with Robb, the uneasy look on Catelyn's face when he passed her in the corridor, Ned's gentle words about strength. He felt a wash of loneliness, even surrounded by so many people at Winterfell. In rare moments, John allowed himself to wonder about his mother. He had never met her, never even heard her name. People gossiped that she was some low-born woman, or a girl Ned Stark had fancied one night. Sometimes, in the shape of his own hands or the arch of his brow, he tried to see a resemblance to someone he did not know. It made his heart tighten. He wanted a mother's love, the certainty of knowing who he was and where he came from. But that was not for him. As far as he could tell, all he had was the name Snow, the brand of bastard in the north. A gust of wind rattled the branches overhead. He lifted his eyes to the face on the weirwood, letting the sense of the old god's presence fill him. He said a silent plea for belonging, for purpose. There were times he felt some intangible stirring, a sense of being both part of this place and separate from it. He could not place it into words. Perhaps it was only the confusion of a boy on the cusp of manhood. He heard footsteps behind him, soft and cautious. He turned to see Arya approaching, her wolfish face lit by a small lamp she carried. She was slender, dressed in a plain tunic and breeches, as was her preference. "John," she said quietly, setting down the lamp. "You always come here alone." John forced a smile. "I like the quiet. Besides, Ghost is usually somewhere around." He glanced around for his white direwolf, but Ghost was off chasing shadows. Arya sat beside him, crossing her legs. "I wanted to say that you did well today in the yard. Rob's a good fighter, but you're faster when you're focused." John's smile warmed a fraction. "Thank you." She studied the carved face of the weirwood. "I hate dancing lessons," she muttered after a while. "Sansa's so graceful and I look like a donkey in a dress. Father says I must learn. He says there's a certain courtesy expected of a highborn lady." John could not help but chuckle gently. "You're better with a blade than with a dancing slipper, that's for sure. Rob can barely keep up with you once you have a practice sword in hand." Arya shrugged. "I wish I could train properly, not just as a game. But that's not what ladies do." She went quiet, looking at him out of the corner of her eye. "I wish we could leave sometimes, you and me. Go see the world as knights or adventurers. Explore the real training grounds in Bravos, or the free cities." Joan's thoughts drifted to the book about Targaryen conquests, about the wide world beyond the sea. He understood her yearning. A part of him wanted to roam free too, away from the constant reminder of his bastard status. But Winterfell was in his blood, or so he believed. "Maybe someday," he said softly, knowing it was likely a dream. "But I'll be here for now. This is home." Arya sighed, letting her eyes close, leaning back against the trunk. "It's home, but sometimes I wonder." John let her words hang in the air. The godswood's stillness wrapped around them, offering a fleeting sense of unity. For a moment, they were simply two siblings, bastard and trueborn, sitting beneath the same old gods, each with a longing that reached beyond the stony walls of Winterfell. Time slipped on. They parted ways eventually, each returning to their chambers. The night sky, strewn with icy stars, settled over the north, while to the south, the mists of the Neck swirled in quiet secrecy. Mara slept in a small hut, lulled by the soft croaking of frogs, oblivious to John's existence, just as John was oblivious to hers. The next morning would dawn cold and gray, and both children would awaken to the tasks and questions that shaped their daily lives. Ned Stark rose again at first light, already bracing himself for the day's labors. He oversaw the household, conferred with his steward about stores of grain for the winter, listened to requests from petty lords in the region. By midday, a new raven arrived from King's Landing, with word that King Robert might visit the north in the coming year. The notion set Ned's heart on edge. A royal visit was both an honor and a burden. He worried how Robert might view John if too many eyes fell upon the boy. He could not refuse the king, of course. That evening, Ned found a moment alone in the crypts beneath Winterfell. He descended the stone steps, a torch in hand. The air was cool and musty, filled with the echoes of centuries. Here lay the long-dead Starks, each statue carved with the features of those who had once ruled. Their stone direwolves flanked them, silent guardians in the gloom. He walked until he reached Lyanna's statue, his torchlight revealing her carved face. In stone, she was forever young, lovely, and sad. Her hands rested on her lap, a stone flower near her fingers. The artisans had not quite captured the fierce spirit in her eyes, but the shadow of her beauty was there. Ned stood before her, hearing once again that whisper. "Promise me, Ned." He laid a hand gently against the cold stone of her fingers. "I have kept them safe," he murmured, voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "I swear it." His voice trembled slightly. He wondered if she might answer, if her spirit still lingered in some far realm beyond his sight. But the crypt remained silent, save for the faint dripping of water from the walls. Ned bowed his head, thinking of John, thinking of Mara. How different their lives might have been if Lyanna had lived. Would it have been peace, or war of another kind? Would Rhaegar's children have been welcomed or hunted all the same? The questions circled him like ghosts. He sighed, letting them settle deep in his chest. Then he turned to go, leaving Lyanna alone in her quiet vigil. Far away in the marsh, Howland Reed guided Mara through a cluster of half-sunken ruins. He carried a torch to ward off any creatures lurking in the water's depths. The ruins were ancient, perhaps predating the arrival of the first men. Moss and vines covered crumbling stone blocks, the remnants of what might have been a small fortress or a watchtower. Mara's eyes shone with excitement. She had never seen this part of the swamp, and even the familiar stink of wet moss felt mysterious here. Howland paused in front of a broken archway. "You should watch your step," he cautioned. "The ground is treacherous." Mara nodded, stepping carefully on stones that jutted from the muck. She heard the faint slosh of water all around, the croak of frogs, the buzz of insects. But her attention was focused on the arch, the symbol etched into the worn stone. It was too old to read clearly, some swirl or spiral design. "What is this place?" Howland's face was unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "No one knows for certain. Some say the children of the forest once roamed here, or it might be an abandoned outpost from centuries past." He touched the stone. "The neck is full of secrets, Mara, and secrets can be dangerous." She tilted her head. "I'm not afraid. I know." He regarded her with a small smile, though there was sorrow beneath it. "You remind me of someone I once knew. You have her spirit." Mara felt a stir of curiosity. "Who?" Instead of answering, he gestured for her to follow him around the archway. A partial staircase led down to a waterlogged corridor. The stale smell of old stone drifted up. Mara's pulse fluttered. She loved exploring new places, especially when guided by Howland. He was a father figure to her, though she was old enough to sense there was something more to their relationship, something withheld. Still, she trusted him. They descended carefully, water sloshing around their ankles. The corridor ended in a small chamber with a collapsed ceiling. Moonlight filtered in through the break, illuminating an ancient tree root that had forced its way down. Moss clung to every surface, giving the space a greenish cast. Howland raised the torch, revealing faint carvings on the walls. Most were too eroded to decipher, but Mara saw a shape, a swirl, perhaps a sigil or a symbol of the old gods. "Howland," she murmured, a tremor of awe in her voice. "Why did you bring me here?" He took a step closer to the carvings. "I wanted you to see that the world is older and stranger than you might imagine," he said softly. "There are many things we cannot explain. Bloodlings, legends, powers the maesters scoff at, but they exist. The children of the forest, the first men, those who came after. We're all part of that tapestry." He paused, glancing back at her. "You must remember that you too have a place in it, whether you realize it or not." Her brow furrowed. She tried to decipher the meaning behind his word. "I don't understand." He set the torch in a bracket on the wall, letting the flickering light dance over the moss. Then he turned to her fully. His quiet eyes held kindness, but also a hidden urgency. "One day, you may have to leave the neck. I cannot say when or how. But if that day comes, you must promise me you'll be careful. Trust only those who have earned your faith. The world beyond is not as gentle as the swamp." Mara felt her heart flutter with alarm, though she tried to mask it. "Are you sending me away?" she asked in a low voice. "No," he replied firmly. "Not yet, and perhaps never. The decision is not mine alone. But there may come a time when you yearn to see what lies beyond, or when danger compels you to flee." He hesitated. "If that time arrives, you must be ready." She stared at him, wanting answers. Yet she could sense the barrier behind his words, the carefully chosen phrases that never quite revealed the whole truth. Still, she felt touched by the concern in his tone. She swallowed, nodding slowly. "If it comes to that, I'll be careful." His expression eased. "Good. That's enough for now." He gathered the torch from the bracket, beckoning her to follow him back. "Let's head home. The water here might rise soon. You've seen what I wanted you to see." They picked their way up the stairs. Mara's mind churned with questions, but she knew better than to push. Howland Reed was never one to show all his cards. As they emerged into the swampy air above, she cast one last glance at the archway with its strange markings. She felt a stirring in her chest, an awareness that her life was connected to something bigger. She couldn't name it, but it made her steps feel lighter, as though the world around her had grown more alive. In Winterfell, the days continued their rhythmic procession. Jon spent hours with the Master-at-Arms, Sir Roderick Castle, practicing stances and footwork. He rode horses with Robb and Theon, raced around the courtyard with Arya, carried Bran on his shoulders. He laughed at little Rickon's antics, tried not to intrude too much on Lady Catelyn's uneasy gaze, and did his best to avoid Sansa's delicate realm of courtly manners. His life was both full and hollow, a paradox he could not resolve. Sometimes, late at night, he dreamed. The dreams were never clear, but they featured glimpses of an unknown land, watery vistas, tall grasses, swirling mists. He would wake with the taste of swamp air in his mouth, his heart pounding. He told no one of these dreams. They felt too strange, too intimate. Upon waking, he would shake off the lingering images and remind himself he was a Snow of Winterfell, a boy with no mother's name, but the Stark name behind him. That would have to be enough. Seasons turned slowly. The realm beyond the north saw shifting politics, rumors of Targaryen plots across the sea, unrest in the Iron Islands. None of it directly touched Winterfell yet. Ned Stark continued to exchange coded messages with Howland Reed, each confirming that all was well, that the orchard thrived, that the caretaker guarded the fruit. Sometimes Ned felt a pang of guilt for referring to Mara in such an impersonal way, but he knew it was necessary. He had not laid eyes on her since she was an infant. She was a ghost of his past, alive only in the hush of secret letters. As a year rolled on and turned to 2, Jon grew taller. He resembled Ned in some ways, but at times, in certain angles of light, there was an echo of someone else in his features, a shape to his cheekbones that Ned recognized from across a battlefield on the Trident. He prayed Robert Baratheon would never see it, but Robert was busy in King's Landing, prone to feasting and hunting, rarely traveling north. For that, Ned was thankful. Mara, meanwhile, learned more of the Crannogman's ways. She became adept at weaving her own nets, at reading the signs of approaching storms by the color of the sky over the marsh. She felt an affinity for the heart trees, wherever she found them, though she did not fully understand why. Sometimes, by the water's edge, she would watch her reflection in the ripples, wondering about her parentage. She knew she was not Reed by blood, that she had been brought here as a child. She had overheard enough hints to suspect she was orphaned in the war. But who had her parents been? No one gave her a straight answer. Ellen evaded. Howland grew somber. Mira shrugged, as if it didn't matter. So Mara buried the question, biding her time. Yet sometimes, especially in the hush before dawn, she felt a pang of longing. She sensed that somewhere, there might be a place that would feel like home in a way even the neck did not. The feeling always faded with the sunrise, replaced by the daily routine of gathering, fishing, cleaning, and quietly exploring. But it was there, a faint spark that refused to die. One humid evening, as twilight draped the swamp in dusky blue, Mara pushed a small rowboat out into the water. She did so without telling Ellen or Howland. She was of an age now, 13 by her count, that she felt a need for independence. She rode deeper into the marsh than she had ever gone alone, navigating slender channels choked with lily pads. The night air buzzed with insects. The sky was nearly dark, except for a sliver of moon. She guided the boat with deft strokes, forging a path through the still water. A strange impulse nudged her forward, as if she were following some invisible beacon. She steered around a bend, where tall grasses rose in dense, reedy walls. Carefully, she parted them with her oar and slipped through. The water opened up into a hidden clearing where a single weirwood stood, half submerged, its roots gnarled and twisting. Mara stopped rowing, her heart beating faster at the sight of the tree's pale bark. She let the boat drift closer. The carved face in the trunk was worn by time and water, but its eyes still seemed to stare. She felt a tremor in her limbs. Softly, she spoke. "Old gods, if you can hear me." She trailed off, unsure of what she wanted to say. A hush fell around her. Even the frogs and crickets went silent. She realized she was trembling. Why? This was just a heart tree. She had seen others before, yet something in the air felt thick with presence. In a rush of emotion, she found herself whispering, "Who am I?" No answer came, of course, but a ripple moved across the water. The face on the tree seemed to regard her gently, as though acknowledging her question. She exhaled, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The truth she sought lay beyond her reach. But here, in this forgotten corner of the swamp, she felt a thread of connection, as though the weirwood recognized something in her. She closed her eyes. A fleeting image rose in her mind. A great fortress of gray stone, crowned with snow, tall towers reaching into a bleak sky. She saw a courtyard with banners bearing the sigil of a wolf's head. Figures moved there. A man with dark hair. A boy with eyes like hers. The vision lasted only a heartbeat before it faded, leaving her breathless. She blinked, confusion swirling in her chest. She had never been to such a place, yet it felt oddly familiar. A low croak from the bank startled her. She realized how late it was. She rowed back quickly, leaving the hidden weirwood behind. But the memory of that moment clung to her. She said nothing about it to anyone, even as she tried to puzzle out what she had seen. A northern fortress with a wolf banner. A moment of clarity, or a dream conjured by her imagination. In Winterfell, Jon Snow jolted awake that very same night from a dream of deep marshes, and a single weirwood, half submerged, gazing at him with sorrowful eyes. He rose from his bed breathing hard, the taste of stagnant water lingering in his mind. Ghosts stirred at his feet, white fur bristling, as though sensing Jon's unease. Jon exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. It was just a dream. Yet it left him with a sense of quiet wonder, of some invisible bond tugging at him from a far distance. He slipped out of bed, opened the shutter, and let the night air wash over him. The courtyard below lay still. The moon cast pale light upon the ramparts. Softly, Jon murmured a prayer to the old gods, asking for guidance. He didn't understand why he felt so restless, only that something in him yearned for answers he could not name. Across leagues of land and water, the twins parted at birth both gazed at the moonlit sky, each holding an echo of the other in some corner of their dreams. The old gods kept their silence, watching as the wheel of fate continued its slow turn. The realms busied themselves with petty squabbles, new alliances, old feuds. Yet in the quiet places, in the hush of ancient trees and the soft gloom of crypts, a promise made long ago still pulsed in the darkness, shaping destinies that neither child could yet comprehend. Morning crept into Winterfell with a hush, the faint silver of dawn kissing the snow-dusted battlements. Ned Stark rose from an uneasy sleep to the sound of ravens outside his window, their voices echoing in the cold. He dressed quietly, belting his cloak around his shoulders, and left his chambers without waking Catelyn. The corridors were dim and still. Servants moved with muffled footsteps, glancing at him in polite deference as he passed. He nodded, his thoughts already clouded with the burden of secrets he carried. He stepped into the courtyard, where a thin layer of frost glimmered on the flagstones. Only a few men-at-arms were about, tending to early chores or sharpening blade. A stable boy led a shivering mare to the stables. Ned paused, inhaling a sharp breath of icy northern air. Each exhalation formed a plume of white that dissolved into the gloom. He found his way to the godswood, as he often did at daybreak, pushing aside a low-hanging branch to enter its hidden calm. Within the godswood's enclosure, frost coated the fallen leaves, and the heart tree stood silent beside the dark reflection pool. He approached slowly, mindful of the hush around him. Sometimes he spoke aloud here, voicing his worries to the old gods. Other times he simply stood, letting the ancient presence cradle him in stillness. Today, he placed a hand on the carved trunk. Through that gesture, he felt the faint sense of communion that had sustained him since boyhood. He closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythmic sound of his own heartbeat. Jon Snow had been in Ned's thoughts all night, the boy's quiet resilience and the subtle signs of longing in his eyes. Now 13, Jon was on the cusp of manhood, sturdy in build, swift with a blade, bookish in his spare moments. Ned knew the heartbreak that lingered beneath Jon's surface. Still a bastard, still on the outside of the Stark circle. The lad never voiced resentment, but Ned saw how he carried it. And always, in Ned's chest, a twist of guilt. The knowledge that Jon was more than even he knew. A robin fluttered overhead, startling Ned from his reverie. He lowered his hand from the trunk and offered a silent, final thought to the old gods. Then he headed back through the orchard, returning to his daily tasks with that same quiet composure. The rest of Winterfell was stirring by then. Catelyn would be up soon, tending to the younger children, and hearing from the steward. Robb might already be breakfasting with Theon in the Great Hall, while Arya and Sansa struggled to wake. Ned passed a serving girl who curtsied and offered him a quick greeting. He mustered a small smile and carried on, the keep's routine beginning around him like clockwork. Before he entered the Great Hall, he spied Jon near the archery butts, methodically drawing arrows from a quiver at his side. Robb and Theon were nowhere in sight, likely still at table, but Jon, as ever, was driven to extra practice. His breath puffed in the cold as he nocked an arrow. The string thrummed. The arrow shuddered into the target. An impressive hit, though not dead center. Jon frowned as he lowered the bow, as if dissatisfaction was the only fuel he allowed himself. Ned approached quietly, and Jon turned, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Good shot," Ned offered. Jon bowed his head. "Thank you, my lord." His tone was respectful but distant. Ned felt a pang. After so many years, it still stung to hear such formality from his own son. Ned clasped his hands behind his back, watching the lad retrieve the arrow. The faint crunch of frozen dirt sounded underfoot. "You keep to your training. That's commendable." "I need to get better," Jon murmured, setting the arrow back in his quiver. "Robb beats me more often than not with a longbow. I suppose I'm decent with a sword, but this? I want to master it too." Ned nodded. He recognized the dogged intensity in Jon. It was the same quiet determination Ned himself had carried through the rebellion, the same need to prove worthy of trust and respect. It never hurts to hone your skills, but remember to rest. You'll be of little use if you strain your back or ruin your shoulders. Jon's mouth curved in a hint of a smile. "Yes, my lord." He hesitated, glancing at Ned, as though about to speak further. Then he inhaled and seemed to think better of it. "I'll come to the hall soon." Ned watched him turn back to the target and felt a stab of regret. There was always a hesitation between them, a silent barrier forged of unspoken truth. If only he could tell Jon that he was cherished, that he was not simply some nameless mother's child. But the realm would devour them both if that confession ever came to light. He left Jon to his archery and crossed into the Great Hall. A fire roared in the hearth, warding off the northern chill. The bustle of breakfast surrounded him, voices echoing, servants hurrying with trays of bread, porridge, boiled eggs. Robb sat at the main table, spooning hot oats into his bowl, Theon beside him, half laughing at some jest. Catelyn was further down, conversing with Maester Luwin in hushed tones. She glanced at Ned, offering a small smile. He took his seat. A servant poured hot tea and Ned gripped the cup in both hands, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. Robb asked about the day's plans, and Ned promised to observe their sparring in the yard later. Theon boasted he would best them all. But Ned only smirked. He glanced at Caitlin, noticing the faint line of worry in her brow. Maester Lewin had just finished speaking to her about something. She waited for a lull, then spoke softly to Ned, mindful of the others. "A raven arrived from King's Landing," she murmured. "They say the king may indeed journey north within the year. Robert has it in mind to see the wall, they say, and to visit you." Ned's shoulders tensed. The king's visit had been an ongoing rumor. Hearing the confirmation made his chest tighten. "Is there a date named?" "Not yet, but the tone of the message suggests it could be sooner rather than later," she replied. "We should prepare accordingly." He set his teacup down with care. "We will. Send word to our bannermen, ensure we have the stores for a large retinue. And I'll want to talk to you at length about how to house them all. Robert travels with half the court these days." She nodded, though a flicker of anxiety crossed her features. She might have suspected that Robert's presence could further complicate Joan's position in Winterfell. The tension around Ned's bastard son was known to her, though she never demanded answers. She only carried a resigned, quiet sorrow in the way she looked at him. He excused himself with a polite bow of the head and left the hall soon after, the weight of the news settling like a stone in his gut. King Robert, with all his jolly presence and black-haired boisterousness, would come, and with him, the potential for danger. If Robert's eye fell upon Jon too closely, if he noticed any Targaryen hint in the boy's face, would the old friend Ned had known as a youth still remain? Or would the king's hatred for the dragon blood overshadow all else? Ned forced the thought away. He had kept the secret this long. He would keep it still. He prayed Robert would see nothing but the bastard of a northern lord. Meanwhile, in the neck, Mara crouched near a patch of reeds, feeling the chill in the damp air. Winter might be milder here than in the far north, but the cold still crept in over time. She'd wrapped herself in a patchwork cloak, scanning the water for movement. She held a fishing spear in one hand, sharpened from bone, the grip wrapped with leather to keep it from slipping. Her breath was steady, her posture poised. She loved the thrill of the hunt, the test of her reflexes. A faint ripple disturbed the surface near the reeds. Mara froze, every sense alive. The shape glided beneath the water, perhaps a large fish. She waited until the ripple steadied. Then she drove the spear down with swift precision. Water splashed, and she felt resistance at the end of the shaft. She pressed her lips together, careful not to let excitement break her focus. When she pulled the spear up, a fat fish thrashed on the bone tip, scales catching the dim sunlight. She grinned, relief and satisfaction mingling in her chest. Another day's catch, which she would bring back to share with Ellen and any who needed a meal. Mara brushed strands of hair away from her eyes, noticing again how a faint gleam of silver caught in her locks when the light hit them right. She wondered briefly if her father or mother had hair like that, then quickly squashed the thought. She had no father or mother. Only Howland Reed and Ellen who had raised her. That was enough. Yet the question still lingered as she waded carefully back to the boat. Spear in hand, she set the fish in a woven basket. The clouds overhead threatened rain, and the swamp air clung to her skin with a chilly moisture. She wondered if the entire realm was like this, or if there were places where the air was crisp and dry, the ground not muddy underfoot. She recalled hearing of deserts in Dorne or frozen plains in the far north. The idea of traveling so far away tugged at her thoughts. When she returned to the settlement, Howland Reed stood waiting at the edge of one of the wooden walkways. He wore a fur-lined cloak to ward off the chill. Beside him was his daughter Mira, a short spear strapped across her back. They both greeted Mara with approving smiles. "You're quite the fisherman," Mira said. "I've yet to catch one so large this week." Mara lifted the basket a little higher, letting them see her prize. "I got lucky. It swam right into my path." Howland nodded with pride. "They'll feed a good number of us tonight." He looked at Mara, expression warm yet tinged with concern. "You've grown skillful these last few years. Soon you'll know every channel in this swamp better than I do." Mara ducked her head shyly. She was fond of Howland's praise, but she knew he watched her carefully, measuring more than just her hunting prowess. Her mind flickered to the old ruins he had shown her months ago, the caution in his voice. She still felt a tension in him, as though he was waiting for something beyond her understanding. Ellen appeared, beckoning them over with a wave. She was guiding a small donkey laden with supplies, the animal stepping gingerly on the wooden planks. "We've brought in some winter stores. Come help me unload, Mara." She agreed, setting down the fish basket. As she worked beside Ellen, transferring sacks of flour and dried herbs into a storage hut, Ellen kept glancing at her. At last, the older woman spoke quietly. "You've been restless lately, have you not?" Mara paused, her arms around a sack of barley. "I don't mean to be ungrateful," she said, cautious. "I love it here truly. It's just, I feel there's so much more beyond these marshes. Sometimes I wonder if I'm missing something I was meant to find." Ellen's face softened. "You're not the only one to feel that pull." She set a hand on Mara's shoulder. "But trust me when I say that beyond these marshes, danger abounds. It's not as simple as wide roads and wonders. There are schemers and lords who would do harm. You're safe here." Mara swallowed, a flicker of stubbornness stirring in her. "I know, but safe can also be small." Ellen sighed, brushing a piece of stray hair from Mara's forehead. "Howland fears for you. So do I. The war may have ended long ago, but the consequences still linger. Tread lightly." Mara nodded, though her mind brimmed with unanswered questions. She resumed unloading supplies, focusing on the rhythmic movements to steady her thoughts. In her heart, curiosity coiled like a living thing, refusing to be quelled. That night, as rain pattered on the roofs of huts, they roasted the fish Mara had caught, seasoning it with salt and herbs. The small community gathered around a fire, the flames dancing in reflections off the water. Mira and Joe Jean told tales of their explorations in deeper parts of the swamp, weaving stories of hidden lakes and half-sunken towers. Mara listened intently, soaking up every word, the flicker of excitement lighting her eyes. Yet she also noticed Howland's watchful gaze upon her, as though he sensed her growing longing. When the meal was finished, she stepped outside into the damp night, letting the drizzle wet her hair. The sky was a stretch of dark clouds, the moon concealed. She breathed in, tasting the scent of moss and earth. For a moment, she recalled the vision she had near that hidden heart tree. A fortress of gray stone, a courtyard, banners bearing a snarling wolf. She had never spoken of it to anyone, though she felt it sometimes in her dreams. She wondered if it was simply a conjuration of her imagination. Perhaps in a different life, she might have been there. She quickly shook off the notion and turned to go back inside. Far to the north in Winterfell, Jon Snow lay in bed, eyes open, staring into the darkness. Outside, a winter wind howled across the walls, sending a faint whistle through the shuttered windows. Ghost dozed at the foot of the bed, white fur barely discernible in the gloom. Jon's mind churned, replaying a conversation he'd had that afternoon with Robb. His half-brother had joked about their future. Robb as the Stark in Winterfell, Jon possibly sworn to the Night's Watch, or else wandering in search of glory. The joke had stung, though Robb meant no harm. Jon wondered if that was truly his destiny. To don black robes and keep watch on the wall until his dying day. Another outcast among outcasts. He rose, careful not to disturb Ghost, and crossed the chamber. The cold stones numbed his bare feet. He thought about lighting a candle but decided against it. Instead, he unlatched the shutters and pulled them open. A blast of frigid air slapped him, making him shiver. Below, the courtyard lay bathed in moonlight, silver shadows dancing on snow. The yard was empty at this hour, only a few torches guttering along the walls. He let his gaze roam up to the sky, where stars struggled behind swift-moving clouds. His mind turned to the Targaryens again, inexplicably. Their history fascinated him in a way he couldn't explain. Something about lost kings, dragons and exiles resonated with his sense of not belonging. He sometimes felt a kinship with the idea of being the last of something, though he could not say why. Perhaps it was merely the glamour of old stories. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. Ghost stirred, padding over to Jon's side with a low whine. Jon ruffled the direwolf's ears. "I can't sleep," he murmured. Ghost blinked with red eyes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Jon sighed, closing the shutters again to trap some semblance of warmth. Tomorrow, he would train again. Try to be better. Perhaps Ned Stark would find some path for him. He returned to bed, determined to snatch a few hours' rest. In his dreams, he saw half-remembered silhouettes of watery forests and reeds twisting in the moon's reflection. Morning came, and with it a swirl of new tasks. Winterfell bustled under the watchful eye of its lord. Ned moved through the fortress, giving orders about winter stores. The need to salt more meat. The possibility of heavy snows that might cut off roads. Over breakfast, he spoke with Maester Lewin about the letter from King's Landing. Plans had to be made for the king's arrival, whenever that day might come. Catelyn joined them, her face composed, but carrying that slight tension at the corners of her mouth. She offered suggestions about guest quarters and feasts. Quietly efficient. Afterward, Ned walked with her along the covered walkway overlooking the training yard. Below, the clack and clang of swords rang out as Theon and Robb sparred under Sir Roderick's supervision. Jon stood off to one side, studying their footwork. Catelyn looked down at the scene. "He always stands apart," she said softly, referring to Jon, though she did not say his name. Ned followed her gaze, a knot in his chest. "He knows his place," he replied, keeping his voice neutral. "And it's not easy for him." She said nothing for a moment, eyes fixed on the courtyard. Then she sighed. "I don't want to see him hurt. But it's not easy for any of us, Ned." He lowered his head. "I know." They left it at that. The old wound left unspoken. High in a tower, Maester Lewin composed messages, sending ravens out across the north, preparing for the possibility of the king's visit. One bird bore a discreet note for Howland Reed, couched in the usual coded language. Talk of an orchard and its caretaker. Another silent reinforcement of the vow that bound them all. By midday, the raven was released. It soared south, crossing snowy fields, following the lines of rivers until the land grew marshy, the air warmer. Mara, of course, had no idea such a message was on its way, or that it concerned her fate. She continued her daily life, oblivious. When the raven arrived at the Crannogman's keep, Howland Reed accepted it in private, reading its contents. As always, the words were guarded, yet the meaning was clear enough. Robert Baratheon might come north. The orchard must remain well tended, the fruit hidden. Howland read those lines several times, then destroyed the message in a small hearth, the flame devouring the parchment. He stared into the embers, remembering the day he had stood beside Ned Stark at the Tower of Joy, the day they had parted the twins for their own safety. Now, all these years later, that danger still loomed. He left the cramped chamber and found Mara outside, helping Mira and Jojen repair a wooden walkway that had begun to sag into the water. Mara's hair was damp with sweat. Her sleeves rolled up, mud clinging to her calves. She glanced up at Howland's approach, offering him a quick smile, which he returned wearily. "Howland," she asked, noticing his expression. "Everything all right?" He hesitated, choosing his words. "Just news from the north. A reminder that times may be changing again." She arched a brow. "What sort of changes?" He met her gaze carefully. "A king might journey through the realm. It could bring travelers this way, more activity than usual. We must be vigilant." "Then?" Mara nodded, though curiosity flickered in her eyes. "I see." Mira stood, wiping her hands on her trousers. "We'll keep watch, father," she said, but her tone suggested she thought the king's business far away. Visitors rarely braved the swamps unless they needed the unique knowledge of the Crannogman. Howland nodded. "Yes, keep watch. If you see strangers wandering near our deeper settlements, guide them away politely, or let me handle it. Our privacy is our strength." He cast a meaningful glance at Mara, who responded with a small frown, as though she sensed he was hinting at something more. She resumed her work, laying a plank across the frame. Yet her mind churned. A king was coming through the realm, perhaps near enough to send travelers into the neck. The name Baratheon flickered in her memory. She had heard mention of a king who ended House Targaryen's reign. But the specifics escaped her. The subject was rarely discussed among the Crannogman. For a moment, she wondered if the king's arrival might be an opportunity to see more of the world. She quickly tried to suppress that line of thought. focusing on hammering in wooden pegs. As the day waned, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Mara and Mira decided to push back to the huts before the storm struck. Jojin lingered to gather the last of their tools. Mara stowed the hammer in a sack, then turned to see Howland watching her with an unreadable expression. She paused, meeting his gaze. He spoke softly, so the others might not hear. "Have you given any thought to your future, Mara?" Her heart gave a twist. I help here," she said carefully. "I fish, I gather, I do what's needed." He studied her face. "You do, and the swamp is safer with you in it. But you're growing older. Perhaps you'll want to find a life of your own making." Her pulse quickened. "You'd let me go?" He shook his head. "Only if it were the right choice. I fear for you beyond these waters, but I won't force you to stay against your will. One day, you may have cause to leave." She set her jaw, uncertain how to respond. She felt torn. The neck was all she had ever known, yet the very mention of a broader realm called to her, in the secrecy of her daydreams. "Is there something you're not telling me?" A shadow flickered in his eyes. "Some truths are best left buried a while longer," he said, the regret in his voice unmistakable. "Trust that I act to protect you. When the time is right, you'll learn what you must." Frustration tugged at her, but she swallowed it. Arguing with Howland would yield nothing. Instead, she lowered her eyes and mumbled an acknowledgement. Then they hurried to shelter as the storm unleashed its first droplets, peppering the water with sharp raindrops. Mara retreated to her small hut, the wind whipping at the thatch roof. Lightning flickered across the murky sky. She tried to rest that night, but her thoughts kept her awake. Memories of a dreamlike fortress drifted at the edges of her mind. She pressed a hand against her chest, wondering why she felt such a strange ache. Eventually, the storm's lullaby rocked her to sleep, her mind swimming with flickers of wolves and stone towers and distant horns. Days turned to weeks. In Winterfell, the snows came heavier, laying a bright mantle upon the land. The children often played in the drifts, building snow forts or engaging in mock battles. Bran climbed the walls precariously as always, to the chagrin of old Nan, who swore the boy would break his neck. Arya snuck away from her sewing lessons to hurl snowballs at Sansa, who shrieked in indignation. Jon sometimes joined them, though less often. The older he grew, the more he threw himself into training. At times, Ned would observe from a distance, hearing their laughter echo off the stones. It warmed him to see them united, even if Jon always kept a slight distance. The boy was growing lean and tall, his dark hair framing a solemn face that could break into an unexpectedly bright smile when he was truly amused. Ned saw the hint of Rhaegar's fine-boned features in him, and at times, it made his heart clench in fear. Should Robert see that resemblance, it could be enough to raise suspicions. Ned took comfort in the fact that Robert had never known Rhaegar's face well in peace. They had been adversaries, and the glimpses Robert had were shaped by war and hate. Still, the knowledge that the king's visit loomed made Ned restless. He and Catelyn began preparations in earnest, cleaning and reopening guest chambers, ensuring larders were well stocked, planning entertainment. Theon Greyjoy boasted he might teach the king archery from the Iron Islands. Robb looked forward to a chance to show off his progress as a young lord in training. Sansa dreamed of impressing the court with her manners, while Arya rolled her eyes. Jon, uncertain of where he would fit in the spectacle, merely trained as usual. Winter nights stretched long. Candlelight flickered in the great hall, and Ned often took refuge in his solar, reading old records or listening to Maester Luwin's counsel. On one such evening, as the wind howled outside, Ned found himself staring into the flames of the hearth, thinking of the past. The memory of Lyanna's dying plea came back to him, as sharp as the day it was spoken. He pictured her face streaked with tears, the blood on her sheets, the small bundle in her arms. 2 bundles, though he only brought one back to Winterfell. The heartbreak of leaving the girl to Howland's care still weighed heavily in him. He tried not to torture himself with the details, yet they resurfaced from time to time. Unbidden, he wondered how Mara fared now, if her hair had grown darker, or retained that silver sheen, if she resembled Lyanna or Rhaegar more. He would likely never know. The last coded letter he received indicated all was well. That had to be enough. In the marshes, Mara found her daily routine both comforting and confining. She practiced with a reed spear alongside Mira, waded deep into misty waters to check on fish traps, repaired huts damaged by storms, and helped gather peat for fires. Though physically occupied, her heart and mind remained restless. She noticed the way Howland and Ellen exchanged worried glances when she asked too many questions, how they whispered behind closed doors from time to time. She sensed a secret, a big one, at the core of her existence. Late one evening, as the frogs croaked a lullaby outside, she approached Ellen's small living space. The door was slightly ajar, candlelight flickering within. Mara had come to return a basket, but paused when she heard Ellen's muffled voice speaking to Howland. She was about to step away out of respect, but their words caught her ear. "She's growing curious, and there's no denying her skill," Ellen was saying. "One day soon, she'll demand to leave, or she'll slip away without a word." Howland sighed. "I know, but the risk is too great. If she's discovered, if anyone finds out who she truly is." Ellen cut in. "And do you intend to keep her ignorant forever? She deserves the truth. Maybe then she'll understand why you're so protective." Howland's voice lowered. "Not yet. The king may come north, and that alone is cause for concern. Imagine if word spread that a Targaryen still lived under our roof. Baratheon would have her head on a spike. And if Ned..." He stopped, as though catching himself. Ellen pressed on. "Ned Stark entrusted her to you. He wouldn't want her stifled." Howland's tone softened with sadness. "He wanted her safe. That was his vow, and mine. The rest must wait until we're certain." Mara stood motionless, her mind spinning. Targaryen. One. That word roared in her head like a distant thunderclap. She could scarcely breathe, her heart pounding so loudly she feared they would hear it. She wondered if she had misheard. Targaryen was the name of the house that once ruled the Seven Kingdoms with dragons. But the war was long done, the Targaryens exterminated or exiled. Cautiously she stepped back, retreating down the walkway, the basket clutched in shaking hands. She felt as though the marsh itself was tilting beneath her feet. Targaryen. Had Howland and Ellen truly been speaking of her in the same breath as that fabled name? Questions crashed through her mind. Why would they mention Ned Stark? What did her life have to do with these powerful lords and kings? She took a shuddering breath and forced herself to return to her hut. Slipping quietly inside, she set the basket aside, her thoughts racing. She hardly slept that night, staring at the thatched roof overhead, listening to the drone of insects. A piece of her wanted to burst into Howland's chamber, demanding answers, while another part was too afraid of what she might learn. She recalled that old dream of the fortress and the wolf banners. She thought of the silver streak in her hair, of her fascination with stories of dragons. Dread and excitement mingled in her heart, leaving her shaking under the thin blankets. When morning arrived, she rose early, subdued and somber. Ellen noticed the shadows under her eyes but said nothing, offering her a small bowl of porridge. Mara ate mechanically, her mind still swirling with fragments of the overheard conversation. Targaryen blood meant a death sentence in the eyes of the king, or so rumor had it. Yet if that name applied to her, how had she ended up here among the crannogmen? She left the settlement after breakfast, claiming she needed to tend some fish traps. In truth, she sought solitude. She maneuvered a small canoe through winding channels until she reached that hidden weirwood she had found months ago. The tree loomed in the midst of a half-submerged clearing, its pale bark slick with algae and vine. Mara tied the canoe to a protruding root and kneeled on the damp wood, hugging herself against the morning chill. Her voice trembled as she spoke, addressing the carved face in the trunk. "Is it true? Am I part of that bloodline? It doesn't make sense." She bowed her head, tears threatening. Her entire identity had been upended. She remembered every moment of her childhood, safe in the marsh, beloved by Howland and Ellen. But if she was Targaryen, or something akin to that, it meant her parents had been more than simple peasants lost in the war. The old gods did not answer, Or if they did, the answer was hidden in the rustle of leaves. Mara gazed at the reflection of the tree's face in the dark water. It seemed to watch her with sympathy. She thought of the stories she'd heard. The Mad King burned his enemies alive. His son Rhaegar died in battle. The Targaryen children were killed or exiled. It was a bloody tale of dragons undone. She tried to imagine herself connected to such a legacy. It felt surreal, terrifying. Returning to the next settlement felt like stepping into a place both familiar and strange. She regarded every hut, every face, with a new perspective. Why had they hidden this truth from her? She realized they must have had reasons. Fear of the king's wrath. Fear of betrayal. Yet that knowledge did not quell her sense of betrayal. Her entire life had been shaped by secrets, and she had not even known it. In Winterfell, days drifted onward, each one bringing the king's approach closer. Though no specific raven confirmed the departure from King's Landing, the fortress prepared nonetheless. Caitlin oversaw the household staff, ensuring that tapestries were cleaned, guest linens aired out, storerooms replenished. Ned found himself increasingly restless, torn between worry and duty. He took to nightly walks around the ramparts, gazing across the snowy expanse of the north. Each time he pictured Robert's loud laughter, the king's hearty appetite for feasts and wine, and behind it all, the simmering hatred for the Targaryen name. Jon sensed the tension. Although no one told him outright, he picked up on whispers from guards, from Theon's offhand remarks. A royal party was no small affair. He wondered what role he would play, or if he would simply vanish into the background. In quiet moments, a fantasy flitted through his mind. What if his mother had been highborn, someone of note, and he was more than a bastard? Then he laughed at his own foolishness. Bastards do not become princes. Reality was cold enough to pinch that dream closed. Yet on one cold afternoon, as he practiced swordsmanship alone in a lesser-used courtyard, he became aware of footsteps. He turned to see Ned Stark approach, wearing a fur-lined cloak. Jon lowered the practice sword, waiting for whatever the Lord might say. Ned observed him for a moment in silence. "You favor a lighter blade," Ned said at last, eyeing the slim practice sword. "It suits you. Your speed is your advantage." Jon nodded, uncertain how to respond. "Sir Roderick says I need to work on my parries." Ned offered a faint smile. "He's right, but your stance looks improved. It's good to see you practicing on your own." Jon set the wooden blade aside. He felt a tension in his chest whenever Ned observed him this closely. He wanted to impress him, to feel accepted. "Thank you. I hope to be of service to you and to Winterfell someday." Ned hesitated, shadows crossing his face. "You will. You have already. And if you find your path leads elsewhere, that may be your service as well." Jon studied Ned's eyes. A surge of longing rose in him, a desire to ask about his mother or his future. But the unspoken rules held him silent. He merely bowed his head. "Yes, my lord." Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, the pressure gentle yet firm. For a moment, father and son stood in a quiet bond. Then, Ned withdrew, turning to go. Jon watched him leave, a storm of emotions in his heart. In that brief contact, Jon sensed something akin to love, or at least concern. The tension in Ned's eyes hinted at secrets. But no explanation came. Jon picked up his practice sword and resumed, striking at an invisible foe, the clang of wood echoing off the cold stones. In the swamp, Mara's world was changing faster. She could not unhear Howland's words, nor could she forget them. Over the next few days, she watched him closely, looking for an opportunity to ask. But he seemed preoccupied, meeting with scouts who patrolled the outskirts of the marsh, reinforcing defenses that most travelers never noticed. It was as though he expected trouble. She guessed that it might be related to the king's rumored journey, or perhaps he suspected she had eavesdropped. One late afternoon, Mara gathered her courage and approached his small house. She found him sitting on a low stool by the doorway, repairing the laces on a leather jerkin. The light of sunset filtered through the swamp's canopy, casting shifting patterns on the wooden boards. He glanced up, noticing the resolve in her face. "May I speak with you?" she asked quietly. He set aside the jerkin. Of course. She stepped closer, fiddling with the edge of her tunic. Her heart pounded. I overheard you and Ellen talking the other night. You mentioned Targaryen. She drew a trembling breath. Is that me? Am I? He rose, placing a hand on her arm to steady her. His voice was low, urgent. Come inside. They entered the small interior space, a single room with a hearth, some shelves, and a simple cot. He closed the door behind them. Mara stood there, shoulders tense, hands clenched at her sides. She waited while Howland paced. At last he faced her, expression laden with sorrow. You were never meant to learn it like this, he said, voice hushed. I promised Eddard Stark I would protect you, and part of that protection was silence. Her mind raced, each word confirming what she had feared. So I am... Her breath caught. A Targaryen. He sighed heavily. Not purely. Your mother was Lyanna Stark, Ned's sister. Your father was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. You have both their blood. He bowed his head. In the last days of the war, your mother bore twins. One was brought north by Ned, to be raised in secret. The other remained with me, here in the neck. That other is you. Tears stung her eyes, shock and anger warring within her. She felt like the floor was dropping away beneath her. Why would you keep that from me all these years? How could you hide something so huge? He pressed a palm gently to her cheek. Because Robert Baratheon hates House Targaryen. If he discovered the prince's children lived, he would not rest until you were dead. Ned Stark couldn't protect two babes at once in Winterfell, so he asked me to hide you. I swore an oath. We believed it was the only way to keep you both alive. She inhaled sharply, reeling from the revelation. Both? My brother, he's in Winterfell? Howland nodded. Yes. Ned has raised him as his own bastard son, under the name Jon Snow. It was the only way to conceal his lineage. He knows nothing of you or his true parentage, as far as we are aware. Nan? A sob caught in her throat. She thought of the vision she had seen. The stony fortress, the wolf banners. That must have been Winterfell. Perhaps a remnant of some connection shared before birth. So all this time, I've had a twin brother I never knew. Howland's eyes glistened with sympathy. Yes, child. It pains me to see you separated, but it was necessary for your survival. We never meant to hurt you. Namaste. Emotions overwhelmed her. She sank onto a small stool, burying her face in her hands. Her thoughts spiraled. She was half Targaryen, half Stark, the daughter of a prince and a noblewoman whose love had started a war. That war had changed the realm's destiny, ending with a new king on the Iron Throne. She tried to steady her breathing, images flashing in her mind. Rhaegar Targaryen on the trident, Ned Stark in the Tower of Joy. A broken vow that had shaped her entire life. Howland knelt beside her. You must understand how dangerous this is. If Robert learns of your existence, it would be your death sentence. And if certain lords discovered you, they might attempt to use you to rally a new Targaryen cause. That too would be perilous. Nabomoini. She looked up, tears tracking her cheeks. I don't want any claim to the throne. I just want to know who I am. He exhaled, relief mingled with sorrow. Then you know as much as I can safely tell you. Your mother was Lyanna Stark, a fierce and beloved woman. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen, a man of great renown. Their union was not what the realm believed, a mere abduction, but a love that changed history. You and Jon were the fruit of that love, kept secret to protect you from those who would harm you. Nod, she sniffed, wiping her eyes. Does Ned Stark know I live? Yes, Howland replied gently. He arranged it all. But beyond him and me and a few trusted souls, no one knows. The weight of it crushed her. She felt an odd anger at Ned Stark, though logically she knew he had saved her. She felt grief for the family she never met, and a yearning for the brother she had been denied. Jon Snow, she murmured, letting the name roll off her tongue. He's my twin. Does he at least have a good life? Howland nodded. He's in Winterfell, cared for by Ned. though a bastard's life is never easy. Still, he's alive and under the protection of the Starks. She looked at Howland with a mixture of betrayal and gratitude. And you've raised me, protected me. I don't know if I can forgive the secrecy, but I do understand it. His gaze was heavy with regret. I would tell you to remain here, to keep the secret still. But I fear your heart has grown beyond these marshes. And if the king truly comes north, rumors might stir. I cannot say what the future holds. Belrin? She pushed to her feet, raw determination threading through her. I have to see him. My brother. I can't just stay here and pretend none of this matters. Howland stood, blocking her path gently with a hand. If you go to Winterfell openly, you put both of you at risk. I won't forbid you, but I beg you to consider the danger. Any slip could lead to Robert's discovery. And it's not just your life, it's your brother's life as well. As far as the world knows, the Targaryens are either dead or exiled across the sea. If you appear with silver in your hair and the face of Rhaegar, the truth might unravel. Then, she paused, torn by 1,000 impulses at once. The desire to run to Winterfell, to embrace this twin she had never known, warred with caution. If her presence endangered him, that would be the cruelest betrayal of all. She closed her eyes, trying to find steadiness. I won't do anything rash, she whispered. But I need time to think. He lowered his hand, relief evident. Thank you. I'll do what I can to guide you. You are not a prisoner here. If you choose to go, we'll find a careful way. But let us plan, not charge blindly. Dear no. She nodded, a hollow ache in her chest. All right. With that, she turned and left, not waiting for him to say more. Outside, the swamp air seemed different, colder than before. The swirling mist around the huts reminded her how fragile her world had been, built on illusions. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting a new wave of tears. Her mother was dead, her father too, and the only living link to them was a brother she had never known. A boy hidden under a false name in a castle of snow and stone. At dusk, she returned to her hut, ignoring Ellen's concerned glances. She lay on her narrow cot, staring at the roof. Sleep refused to come. Instead, she thought of Jon, of Winterfell's tall towers under swirling snow, of the possibility that somewhere in his dreams, he too might sense a missing piece. The knowledge that she was not alone in this world consoled her and tormented her in equal measure. She no longer belonged solely to the Neck. She was Targaryen and Stark, the child of ice and fire. And though she might remain hidden from a kingdom's wrath, she could not remain hidden from her own heart. Days slipped past in a fog of uncertainty for Mara. She still went about her tasks, but with her mind elsewhere. She practiced spearwork mechanically, helped gather provisions, nodded along to Mira's chatter, all the while feeling as though her real self floated somewhere outside her body. She wanted to devour every morsel of knowledge about Lyanna and Rhaegar, about this Jon Snow, about the war that had ended their parents' lives. But caution held her back. If she pressed too hard, it would only stir up more fear from Howland. She needed to plan, to decide carefully how to proceed. In Winterfell, the first word of the king's departure from King's Landing arrived by Raven. The note was terse but clear. Robert Baratheon would travel north with a large retinue, visiting lordly seats on the way, expected to arrive at Winterfell in a few months' time. The realm had not seen such a royal progress in years. Ned read the message with a sense of grim inevitability. He met Catelyn's eyes over the parchment, and a silent understanding passed between them. They must be ready. Robert's thirst for revelry and hunting would need sating, and the castle would be full to bursting. The potential for danger weighed on Ned like a heavy cloak. Yet there was no turning back. He would welcome the king as an old friend, and pray that no secret spilled forth. He sent out his own letters, calling in banners, arranging a grand welcome. At the same time, he dispatched another cryptic note to the Neck, urging continued vigilance. If Howland Reed understood the subtext, he would keep Mara well out of sight. Ned knew nothing of her own awakening, and the questions now blazing in her mind. He could only guess that she remained oblivious to her parentage, living quietly in the marsh as he had hoped. That assumption, perhaps, was the last piece of fragile comfort he clung to. Days bled into weeks as the king's caravan drew nearer. The snows began to melt under the hesitant approach of spring, though the air remained frigid at night. Word reached them that Robert's progress was slow, full of feasting in every town and castle along the road. That suited Ned just fine, allowing more time to prepare. He had no illusions that this visit was merely a social call. Robert likely had some political matter to press upon him, or something else in mind. Maybe the king would ask Ned to be his hand, or to arrange a marriage for one of the Stark children. The possibilities were endless. Jon Snow, for his part, tried to remain invisible. A grand royal visit only highlighted his bastard status. He watched the flurry of preparations with a mix of fascination and trepidation. Robb teased him that the king might knight them both if they impressed him on the training field. Jon responded with a hollow laugh, privately certain that a bastard would never receive such honor from a man who despised Targaryens and illegitimacy alike. On the nights that followed, Jon's dreams of swamps persisted. He would wake, heart hammering, uncertain why he pictured a girl's voice echoing through mist, or a silver gleam in the darkness. He told no one, certain it was just a fancy of his imagination. Far to the south, Mara paced her hut, her thoughts consumed by what she had learned. She pictured Jon in Winterfell, imagined how he might appear. Did he have their mother's eyes, or more of their father's features? Did he laugh often, or was he solemn? She wondered if he ever felt alone. And through it all, the name Targaryen loomed, accompanied by images of dragons, war, and vengeance. It weighed on her as heavily as it weighed on Ned, though neither knew the other's thoughts. The king's progress advanced, inch by inch, and the realm braced for whatever storms his arrival might bring. And in the quieter corners of that realm, the twin children of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen moved inexorably closer to a fate long ordained by promises made in blood and tears, under the fading light of a crimson dawn.